Are you familiar with the story of Ogun, Oshun, and Oya? Ogun was married to Oshun and Oya. This is told as a love story, but is actually describing an alchemical process. Ogun is iron, Oshun is fresh water, and Oya is air. Iron was submerged in water, causing it to rust. Then air came and separated the mixture and brought an end to the marriage. This is actually the process of corrosion and evaporation. These alchemical processes are also directly related to spiritual evolution. How? To find out, register for the next live webinar, Alchemy, on November 11th, 2015. Visit saduluhouse.com/events to RSVP and to see our list of monthly webinars for 2016. 2016 webinar topics include meditation, spiritual cleansing, astral projection, chakras, crystals, water magic, candle magic, the third eye, animal totems, dreams, and sex magic. Don't forget, check us out at saduluhouse.com/events.
Peace, and welcome everyone. Welcome to another segment of Foundational Friday on enlightenment and transformation. Of course, speaking, I am Chief Yuya. Just want to clear my throat for a moment. Excuse me for that. But I want to welcome you all, of course, to another segment of Foundational Friday on enlightenment and transformation. You know that it's always an honor for me to be in this space with you. And I want to say peace to everyone who is coming in through the chat room, not the chat room, excuse me, coming in through the phone lines, and everyone who's listening in on YouTube. And, you know, I say it every time. I'm going to say it again. To everyone who tunes in afterwards through the archives. You know, I just want to give a big peace and a big welcome to you all, no matter when you got here. You know, whether it's you're listening live or you're listening to this 3 to 4 years after it actually aired, it's okay. As long as you get here, you know, this is your path and these are your steps. And sometimes we have to circle around the territory and the landmarks to make sure that it's safe to lay our head down. So I know we got a lot of lurkers in the Anu Nation. We got a lot of people who just kind of circle around and just are sniffing and sniffing and sniffing and trying to make sure that it is safe ground for them to nestle. So, you know, take your time. We'll be here. Take your time. But anyway, tonight, let me give you the number as always. I know we already got some people on the phone lines. I see you. But if you want to call in, you want to speak, or you want to share anything, you could do that by calling in 347-945-7680. 347-945-7680. And you just hit the number 1 on your telephone. Oh, and you know, let me also remind you all that I guess this would be the last one. This would be the last show or strong day show. That means Monday through Friday that will be airing on Blog Talk. We'll continue to be on YouTube. So, you know, you can always catch us at Enlightenment and Transformation TV. So that is youtube.com/enlightenment and transformation. Now, my Sunday show, Chief Speaks, which many of you are familiar with by now. Many of you came in because of Chief Speaks. We'll still be airing that on YouTube, broadcasting on Enlightenment and Transformation, as well as High Frequency Radio. But for these, you know, the YouTube ones, we're going to be doing them, you know, just pretty much solely on YouTube. But it doesn't mean you cannot interact. The cool thing is that you can still interact with any of our hosts from Masterminds Monday while that's going on, or our Yuya Assaan-ANU or myself. You can still interact live while the shows are going on. And you got a couple of ways to do that. You can either leave comments while the videos are going on. I mean, while the shows are going, and we see the comments pop up and we can respond that way. Or also, as many of you see on the bottom left of your video screen there, if you're watching from YouTube, you see an option to participate in the Hangout. So you can do that as well. And you can ask questions right in the middle of the Hangout while the show is going. So that's what we're going to be doing going forward, after today, because I guess Sunday is the first, if I'm not mistaken. You guys, you regular listeners, you know how I am with dates and stuff. Well, more so, I'm good with dates. I should say time. Time throws me off a little bit. But yeah, so you can still participate live. Just to let you all know, it's just that on the Monday through Friday shows, we won't be using the Blog Talk call-in number, but it's actually easier to come in now, do the Hangout. It's a lot easier, and then you don't have to worry about not being able to get through and stuff like that. And eventually, I will be adding our own phone number to the shows. I'm holding off for a little bit because of a couple of things that I want to get straightened first, in terms of the technology. So just to let you know, just to give you all a heads up. But again, on Sundays, call in, same number, 347-945-7680. And you can call in and build with us on Chief Speaks. So yeah, as the title of this segment says and shares with us all, we're going to be dealing with the idea in this show of Shango Baptist. The Shango Baptist. And a lot of you may be familiar with this term, and especially those of you who have family in the Caribbean, are from the Caribbean, especially Trinidad, Tobago. You definitely, of course, know about Shango Baptist. Okay. And I'm going to start the show off by, I'm going to share a couple of things. I'm not going to go into all of the history of the Shango Baptist because, I don't know. I think there's some points around it that are more interesting to me. That's just because I'm not a big history person. I've read a lot of books on Shango Baptist, but I'd rather get into, like, I like to hit the more, I'd say the more relevant points when I talk about certain things. Unless I'm doing like a long work, like a 3-4 hour workshop, then I could just relax and say, okay, let's start from the beginning. But we're going to hit a couple of important points I think you guys will get something out of. And the first point that I want to hit in dealing with this idea, or the system or the religion known as Shango Baptist, is that technically there are no Shango Baptists. That name is actually a misnomer. Okay, technically. All right, so we're going to start there. We're going to start there by some elucidation. Now, I know you're probably saying, well, why didn't you name the show what it's really supposed to be? Because if I named the show what it's really supposed to be, you wouldn't make the connections. You'll understand why, in a little bit. But I want you to start there with that understanding that term Shango Baptist is actually more of a derogative term. Okay, it's like saying fake Christian, or I don't know, witch doctor. Okay, so, and not that I have an issue with that, but we just, we're about clarification and information. We want to explain things first. Okay, so a lot of times when people are referring to Shango Baptist, they don't realize that there's two different entities that exist within the Caribbean in terms of those religious structures that they're referring to. And a lot of times, because people are ignorant of that culture, which, there's things in life that we're ignorant about. You don't have to feel bad about that. But because they may be ignorant of that culture or that way, they just lump everything together and they say, okay, well, Shango Baptist. I had someone do that to me once, when he was asking, he's about another Babala, asking about the spiritual practices of my family, and I said, well, I have family who practice Shango. And he said, oh, Shango Baptist. See, that's right. You got family all in Montserrat. And, I had family on Montserrat, way before the volcano blew and everything, and afterwards, because half the island is still active. But they were all Shango, and the family I have in Exuma Island and Andros and all over. I got family all over the Caribbean. Can't pinpoint. All right. So The thing is, I tried to explain to them, no, it's not Shango Baptist. It's different. You have Shango, and then you have spiritual Baptist. It's two different things. Okay. So we're going to start our show off with speaking right. A lot of times when I do my segments and things like that, I try to focus on what we're actually saying, because sometimes through our spiritual work, or just through our movements, through spiritual communities or religious communities, we begin to take on the jargon and the vernacular of those communities, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, because you're first recognized culturally through your language. So, once we come into certain culture and we come into certain understandings, we want to use the language and the mores and the tones of that culture. Okay. So, okay, I'll deal with that later. I got something on the side here happening. But so yeah, so you have this idea of the Shango Baptist, and I'm gonna explain where that came from. Okay, but let's start with where it started. All right. So the Spiritual Baptist Church, technically by many people's accounts, actually predates the Shango Church. I know what you're saying, but no, recent tradition is older than Christianity. Okay, I got you, but we're just using words here. We're just trying to figure out and learn where the terminology comes from. That's where we're gonna start. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna have to hold on 1 second. I got something going on here on the side. Just give me 1 second. I'm always getting interrupted. Whether it be by human, beast, spirit, trying to get through these segments and do these teachings, and it's always something, always something. I have two unruly animals over here. I need some things to throw. Digging into supply boxes. I'm referring to cats. Okay. Got these, because a warlock always has to have certain animals around them, even if they're useless. These animals of mine, they just dig in stuff and break things and knock things over and interrupt me when I'm trying to do shows. So I got up just now to throw a slipper, but I couldn't get close to a slipper. And now okay, I'm gonna have to just keep doing the show. But yeah, welcome in, welcome into my world a little bit. You get some personal stuff, right? So anyway, so you first had the idea of the let me see if I can hit him with a slipper. Okay. So you had the idea of the Spiritual Baptist, right? And the Spiritual Baptist was an offshoot, really, believe it or not, because even though we're speaking about, now I got beeps and bloops going off. Even though we're speaking about the idea of a more indigenous tradition and a more indigenous of quote unquote religion, and we're talking about the Caribbean, the spark actually really came from the Southern Baptists of America. Okay, now this is where I guess it gets a little interesting, depending on what you're interested in. But a lot of this is related to the War of 1812. If any of you are familiar with that, there's a book that not a book, there's a movie you can watch to get a little bit more information on it, or just some of the things surrounding the events surrounding it. There's a series by the name of The Book of Negroes. That was it, The Book of Negroes. All right, and it gives you a little bit of the background on that one, right? But long story short, in the War of 1812, you had not only Africans in America who were enslaved, who had liberated themselves. They were given offers to go to fight for the British in order to basically win their freedom. So what many of them did, they were fighting, and some of them ended up in the Caribbean, through through the fighting. Right now, a lot of them were already what you call the Southern Baptists, right? For what we know a Baptist to be. Okay, but these were enslaved Africans. Let me give you a little side note. I know a lot of people are always saying, you always say stuff like this, like the way I speak, the way I say certain things. One of the things that you'll only hear me say in a slip up is slave. You only hear me refer to an African as a slave if they're usually someone who was self-re-enslaved. Because by calling someone a slave, it almost implies that someone can be born a slave. Like if I say, oh, they transported slaves in the transatlantic slave trade, even when you say slave trade, it makes it just sound like a basic commodity, like the sugar trade. But when you say that someone was enslaved, you realize that the process was active and it could still be active. And these were people who were born free and were enslaved by a process. Just like sometimes most of the time you won't hear me say slave master. I'll say slave maker, because you have to, you can make someone that way, So just as a sidebar, as you hear me speaking, you may say, well, I just keep saying the enslaved Africans in America. Isn't there a shorter way to say that? Could he just say slaves? Wouldn't that be easier? But anyway, so a lot of them, they ended up in that region because they were fighting and they were recruited by the British to take Trinidad. Because remember, before the British colonized Trinidad, they were colonized by the Spanish. Okay, so I know a lot of people, they get that a little confused sometimes. They think that Trinidad Tobago, I mean, you can even look at the name, kind of get a clue on that, but they think a lot of times Trinidad Tobago, was originally colonized by the British, and it wasn't. It was originally colonized by the Spanish, and then after the British came and took it over from the Spaniards, there were a lot of formerly enslaved Africans who were still left there. And you got to remember that, or just know that Trinidad and Tobago has a very interesting demographic background or breakdown, because Trinidad and Tobago is like 40% African, 40% Indian. So there's a lot of indigenous people there, a lot. So the thing is about it, and why am I talking about Trinidad and Tobago so much, right? We're talking about Shango Baptist, Spiritual Baptist, because this was the place where you had the genesis of this tradition. A lot of people believe that it started in St. Vincent, but that's actually incorrect. So basically, you had these Africans who were now on this Caribbean island, basically recreating Africa now. And they came with these Baptist ideas, right? But the thing is, because they had a Southern Baptist ideology, right, which included like that fire baptized church service. Some of you may be familiar, where you're basically singing and dancing and falling out, and it's not as sterile as maybe a Catholic experience or some of the experiences in the northern churches, where that form of Protestantism is just more sterile and more stoic. Down south, they're biting the heads off of snakes and drinking poison and going berserk. So they brought that to the islands, and the term that they were given, they were called shouters. Okay, so you have three different actual forms. You have Shout Baptist, Spiritual Baptist, then you have Shango. Those are three different traditions. And unfortunately, people just lump them and say, oh, that they're Shango Baptists. Okay, that's like I said, we know now that term doesn't even exist. But again, you got to know what people, you got to learn, instead of just saying things. So anyway, you had these group of soldiers, who were down there now. They were called the Merkins, or sometimes the Americans, which was probably short for American. I'm not sure, but I just know from my own study and from speaking to people down there, I always knew the term Merkin or American. I'm like, it's got to be American, because it was always referencing the enslaved Africans who came, in that war and stayed there. So anyway, so they had this spiritual tradition down there that they were practicing, which was it was Baptist religion. However, it had the infusion of the excited form of Baptist Christianity that you had in the southern states of America, right? That's number one. So then what happens from there, you also had an infusion. You had about 4% of the population there was Yoruba. Uh-oh. You know what happens next now. So you got these Yoruba there. So they're doing their thing. And you know what their thing is. That's why I didn't want to, we didn't get into I didn't do all this Orisha. But what they actually called it was Ife. So in that region in Trinidad and Tobago, they didn't call it like Orisha, like we may call it, like the Orisha tradition or practicing Ifa. They called it Ife tradition or Ife religion. And in some places, Ifa is called Ife. Remember, Ile Ife is in our tradition. Well, it's for those of us who are adherents of the Yoruba tradition. Ile Ife would be like assimilate. For those of you who are Christians listening, this would be like our Vatican. You know, that is the spiritual capital, you know, of our tradition. Okay, so saying that I practice Ife is like, you know, I'm practicing it from the root. So there's nothing wrong with saying Ife. Okay, keep in mind also that the term Ife means love. Okay, so practicing love, easy enough, right? So you had this idea. You had now these Yoruba who were practicing Ife. Then you had the Southern Baptists, who's obviously they also had some introduction to Orisha and Ife from being in the States and interacting with West Africans there. But not only that, many of their rituals and their practices resembled those of the people there who were practicing Ife, as well as those who were practicing who were called shouters. Now, because the assimilation was made so quickly between those practicing Ife and those who were referred to as shouters, shouters were then outlawed. There was legislation written to outlaw the Shango practice. The shouting practice. Okay, this was around like 1914. Okay, 1914, because what they said was that the series, like they outlawed bells, for instance. You couldn't play a bell, like tinkle a bell, because they were saying that the series and the rhythms and the tones of bells that the shouters were using were actually demonic calls. So they had associated shouting Baptists. And again, for us here in the States, we would probably think of a shouting Baptist as like a fire baptized Baptist. In fact, when people go into the spirit, most of the time we call it shouting. Oh, look, he was shouting. Even when they're dancing, we call it shouting. Okay, so that's where that came from, because they said that they would shout, they would scream, they would clap their hands, and they would fall out. It sounds like a voodoo ceremony, huh? But anyway, so they said, no, that's shouting. That's not really Christianity. That's some other, basically, that's some African stuff, which they associated with demonology, outlawed it to the point that people were getting arrested behind this. They couldn't practice their tradition. So, you know, this wasn't really actually allowed until 1951, you know, where the Shouting Act was passed and they were allowed to practice their tradition however they wanted to. But you see that association, you know, and this is an important point that I'm making, because a lot of times we look at Christians or whatever, those who practice indigenous tradition, or you think it's indigenous tradition, because again, that just like somebody said recently, I'm getting so tired of the word consciousness. Somebody told me I'm just getting so tired of the word metaphysics. I'm getting tired of the word tradition, to be honest with you, because it's a misnomer. You don't know when a tradition began. You know, you just see something that looks old and looks deep, and you say that's the traditional way. You don't know. You weren't there, so you know. But anyway, so they were able at that point to practice what they did. Now, around that time, you also had people who were involved in the spiritual Baptist movement, okay, which its leading doctrine is the Bible. Make you clear, because we have spiritual Baptist church you go to, and if you go in, you feel like you're in an African ceremony. I mean, you know, there's drumming, there's dancing, you know, and there's a strong acknowledgement of the African indigenous roots that they carry. So they acknowledge that in a very strong way. However, the doctrine that they teach is biblical. In fact, the main structure of their doctrine is the King James Bible. Okay, so you gotta be very clear on that distinction. Okay, so you had people who were involved in the spiritual Baptist movement who started to look at the Ife tradition and saying, "Hey, what are they doing over there? You know, they're drumming too, they're dancing, but they're dealing with these entities known as Orisha, which became a thing where it was like you had this people who were functioning in between the spiritual Baptists, like because you have people like that now. They go to church on Sundays, but then after church they come into me for readings, or they're listening to Chief Speaks. You see, so they're like flowing in between both of them. Well, you had a group that began to do that, right? And what they were doing was they were acknowledging Jehovah or the Lord God from the Bible as being the God of man. But then they acknowledged these Orisha as being the gods of nature. You see, so and they resolved this in their minds. So they started kind of dipping into the traditional or the African traditional systems, and they received the name of Shango Baptist, which was like saying you're not really a Baptist. You're claiming to be a Baptist, and you're using the quote unquote excuse of our previous imposition of Catholic and Protestant religion, from our slave makers. You're using that saying, well, no, I'm a Baptist and I'm a Christian because this is what was put on me. However, this is what I want to go practice. So you're doing that to appear safe because of all that outlawing and all that. There was still a stigma. Okay, so they were given that term Shango Baptist, like you're not really a Baptist, but at the same time, you're not really totally in that either. Now, Shango, the tradition, for those who practice it there, it's called Orisha tradition, or some just call it Shango. Okay, that would be the proper term for it, Orisha or Shango, not Shango Baptist. That's a person who's straddling the lines. Okay, now, so that's why I said early in the show, if I named it properly, it wouldn't be so clear. Because if I named it properly, it would be like, okay, I'm either going to call this show Shango, or I'm going to call it Baptist. So to explain it. Oh, and Justin says, "Don't be beating on my cats." Yeah, they're kittens anyway. Kittens are tougher than cats. They're not brittle. And my kittens are like dogs anyway. They're like rough and tough. All they do is fight all day and fight me, fight my house. So they're all right, man. They'll be all right. They were acting up today though. So they're on ice right now. But anyway, so I told you I could see the comments as the show was going. Don't worry about it. Ask your questions. I'm right here. So yeah, so that's how that kind of like the transition came about. Now let's get into a little bit. I want to get into the idea of baptism, because what you'll find is with these three traditions, again, Shango, which originally was Ife, as it was called, in the islands, but eventually then became Orisha. So like if you go to Trinidad and Tobago, it's spread through many islands. Now the spiritual Baptist movement is much further spread. You have spiritual Baptists in of course Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent, Guyana, the Bahamas, Jamaica, New York, Brooklyn. We have spiritual Baptist churches here. We also have spiritual Baptist churches in Queens. So I mean it's a far spread tradition. And I mean, for those of you who are diehard Christians, it's really like a nice transition point, to be honest with you, because it has the infusion of the African values, but it's a hard infusion. It's not just during Kwanzaa or Black History Month where now a pastor comes out with a, kente cloth bow tie, something like that, but again, the highest doctrine is the Bible. So you deal with that. But I wanted to get into an aspect of something. I'm gonna get into two aspects. One is the baptismal aspect, but it's something else that I think is important. Again, originally, People were practicing these practices or these religions because they needed a tradition that made them appear to be safe in the eyes of their former slave makers. I know we get that excuse a lot as it pertains to Santeria, and we're told, well, no, they hid it within the forms of the Catholic saints. Don't worry, I'm gonna break that one down too. We got a show coming up on Santeria, and I'm gonna tell you the truth behind that one because that's a lie. Okay, but anyway, let's get back to the Baptist, Shango Baptist, right? So the thing is though about it, okay, well now you're not enslaved, you're liberated now. The act has been passed since 1951 where you can even shout and play your bells and play your tambourines and you're not going to get locked up. So why are you still doing it? Why not just do the indigenous stuff? And just think about this for a second. Okay. Even here, right? If we look at certain traditions, they say, "Oh yeah, well, when we were on the plantations, we had to hide what we were doing, and we hid our fighting forms, and we called it dance and stuff." Well, why are you still doing it today? I'll give you an example. In the spiritual Baptist community, you have what's called mothers, right? Every church has a mother, even though the mothers are not recognized by like the archbishops as being like pastors or bishops a lot of times. And certain ones, because some of them they do, some they don't. It's not like an empirical doctrine that goes across all of them all the time. But you do have these mothers, right? Each church has a mother. And the mothers and many of the women inside of those churches, they wear aprons. Okay. And the whole science behind the apron is that she's there to serve because they take it back to when we were on the plantation, and every plantation ground had what was called the mammy or the mother. And she oftentimes would nurse the slave makers as well as those who were enslaved, and she was that woman was that main servant of the actual grounds. So when they instituted it within their spiritual movement, they said we still have to have that mother present with the apron on. Okay. On this one, I'm only going to share information. I'm not going to make a personal judgment, but I'm just going to share the information. So it's just kind of interesting a lot of times how we still carry things over, and maybe we do, maybe we don't. Everyone's different, but really ask ourselves, why are we still doing this? Is this still necessary? That's when it gets kind of tricky when you start talking about tradition, or we talk about traditional dress. I've told you guys 100,000 times within the conscious community, the women dress like field hands. That's the look of the conscious community for women. Having your hair wrapped up, a long voluminous dress or skirt, in a puffy frumpy top. And if you take that exact same, even if you look in the Orisha community, look at how the women are dressed. They'll have on all whites, but look at how the whites are set up. And then take that same image, pick up everybody and put them on a cotton field. Tell me, does it work for you? And again, I'm not indicting one person or anything, but it's just some of these things we sometimes should look at and try to determine where what we call our culture and our norms as it pertains to not only our language, but our attire, where it actually came from. And if it was given to us as a defensive measure, do we still need to take those defensive measures? Are we still in those positions? Can we fully grow and expand and maximize to the point that we're supposed to be if we're still imagining that we have a certain yoke of bondage that no longer exists anymore? Just a thought. Again, I'm not tearing down anybody's thing publicly. Now, if we were all in my house and this was a private conversation, yeah, I'd be saying something different. I don't have a problem tearing somebody's stuff down, but publicly, no. Amongst my family, yeah, because I have to give my family my thoughts sometimes, or at least the doctrine, to make sure we're doing what we say we're about. Okay, but you can draw your own conclusion. But anyway, so I wanted to tap on to the idea of baptismal, because the whole baptismal idea was a key point, because that was like the science that really combined and linked the different traditions together, right? You had that in Ife, which became, of course, Orisha, or became Orisha / Shango. You had that in the spiritual Baptist community, and you also had it in the Shouter Baptist community. And I want to make a point to share that the Shouter Baptists live mainly by name, because the spiritual Baptists could also be classified as Shouter Baptists. You know, they didn't come out and say, "Hey, we're the Shouters." That's something that was a title they were given. Okay, so I just want to make that distinction for everyone. But you know, the spiritual Baptists, of course, and as far as their tradition, they're Christians. They're straight up Christians. Okay, and then of course you have Ife, Orisha / Shango, and you know what that is. We've been covering that long enough that I don't need to go back to basics on that. Okay, so the same Orisha practice you're practicing here, they're doing over there. It's the same thing. Maybe a little bit more powerful over there, to be honest with you. But anyway, so the baptismal aspect, right? That's a key piece, right? The baptismal. Oh, and let me give you all a number. I see we got a lot of people on the phone lines. If anybody wants to speak, feel free to press the number 1, or if you want to just call in, 347-945-7680. If you don't, that's fine too, because I know we got a lot of people who just like to listen. And you know, I'm always telling people you gotta learn to listen. So you know, if that's fine too. All right, but I just like to let everybody know, because sometimes we do get those questions. How do I interact with the show? I want to talk. I wanted to talk to you about soon, so I didn't know how to interact with you. Well, you know, every show, especially Chief Speaks, people, when people send those messages, it's kind of funny, because it's like at the end of the little intro, it says 347-945-7680. Call in. Let's bill. Then as soon as I come on, I'll say, hey, how's it going, everybody? Hey, you know, you can call in 34, you know, but people don't listen. That's all this is. All right, so I see we got a call. Then I'm going to get into the baptismal piece. I'm going to check this call. 856 area code. You're on Foundational Friday.
Oh, yeah. How you doing now?
I'm well. How you doing again today, brother?
Blessed.
Good.
I just had a quick thing to throw in some of that historical front you shot out about the War of 1812 and whatnot. I hear my echoing in there.
No, we hear you clear. We got you clear.
Okay. The French were involved in that too, just to mention. I just got a quick course in Trinidad history lately. I've been going there a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
And the French were in there too. So
yeah, they were
between the Spanish, the French, and the British. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
And that Ife thing. I think Ife is around where I like to call it Nigeria, but Ife is around that area, right?
Well, yeah, you have
that's the third or fourth.
Ife is a place. Yeah, Ife is a town, and it's in this tradition is considered that's where life began. In Ife, yeah. So Ife is, yes, it is a physical space in Nigeria. Yeah.
Yeah, it's over that way, I'm saying, but that's the third or fourth location of it. I just thought I'd mention that. I didn't know if that had come up before. It was in 3 or 4 locations before it reached that far west. The other locations were a little more east, a lot more east, as it were, as it came across from the east to the west.
Right.
Anyway, that's according to the Johnson brothers or the Ogun brothers. And then the War of 1812, there was a movie. Van Pelman's son was in it. I forget his first name.
Mario.
Was in it. Yeah, it was a movie he did about the people coming from Cuba during the time, because they had some friction battles in Cuba. I just thought I'd mention that too.
Okay.
And that guy Admiral Wilson, because I'm in New Jersey, right across the bridge from Philly.
Okay.
And that guy Admiral
Wilson, the Woodrow Wilson Bridge.
That war, 1812. But that was when they were around the Opium War. I think that was the first Opium War, was 1812. And they bombed the heck out of China, like they lost their minds.
Yeah.
And but as a result, the idea of coolie, which also went to Trinidad, you know, the idea of coolies, which also went to Trinidad, was a result somewhat of a result of that war. So I just thought I'd mention those things as you were going along. That's all. But it crossed my mind. I wasn't really going to mention them.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's all good. Give thanks, brother. We appreciate that. All right. Give
Beautiful.
thanks. All right. Peace. Yeah. So we got some fun facts. I love fun facts. But yeah, the French were also involved, like the brother said. He's absolutely right. The French were involved in that war as well. But it's always interesting, man. And I think I mentioned something about this recently. Paraphrasing. Maybe I didn't mention it, I was just joking about it. But I was listening to Queen Shahrazad Ali, and she was speaking about something. I don't remember, just one of the wars. And basically someone had brought up about how, there were enslaved Africans who fought for the Confederacy. So everyone thinks, it was just the North and they were fighting up North, but there were those who fought for the South too. And she was like, yeah, well, we'll do anything to be down. It doesn't have to make any sense. It could be totally backwards just as long as we can be down. And I mean, it was funny. It's true, but it was funny at the same time. So you always find that there's always a happy-go-lucky African, that's key and instrumental in almost any war that you look at. There's some happy-go-lucky African in there that's making the difference. We fight for a lot of people. We get outsourced for a lot of people's wars. I mean, even now, I guess that's a deeper cultural conversation, but some of the things that we do to one another, some of the things that we're just regenerating or have become self-perpetuating, that the war in our own families, the things that we do to each other, the way we hurt each other, we fight a lot of people's wars, just to be down. We'll destroy our families just to get a pat on the head by the stronger society, just so we can stand up in court and say, yeah, because, I just want to leave and move on with my life and all, just to get a pat on the head. So that's a form of, that's mercenary work. That's a form of fighting someone else's wars. All right, take another call from 816 area code. You're on Foundational Friday.
Good evening, Chief.
Good evening.
This
How you
is
doing?
Imani.
Peace, Imani.
I'm well, and yourself?
Things are well.
Grease and hair grease.
No doubt. No doubt. The woman of faith.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. What's happening?
Indeed. Well, Chief, this is my first time calling in. I've been listening for quite a while, and I must say I appreciate your wisdom and knowledge that you share with us, and
thank you.
It's much needed. And my question is that I have heard from a couple of people here in the recent past, particularly from Tariq Nasheed and Hidden Colors 3, where he was, saying that we had a form of an ancient Christianity, back in the motherland. And so I took up on myself to try to do some research to see if this was true or not. And, and as to why, if this is true, why would it be called Christianity? I thought that was more of an American word and not so much an indigenous one. So, could you shed some light on that?
Well, tell me what you found first. You've been listening enough. You've been listening long enough to know I was going to do that to you. You should know my MO by now.
Let me take that back. I looked into Ethiopia, and found that there was a Coptic, holy book, if you will. That's under like lock and key and what have you, and no one of modern times could, touch it and get close to it. But so that is just says, a holy book. It didn't say that it was based in Christianity. So I was thinking that, could this be what he was speaking of? And I have an Ethiopian male friend that how they practice is kind of borderline Christianity. And I just thought that that stems from when the Italians came in and eventually, you know, conquered the land or what have you. I guess they were the last nation to be colonized, rather, not so much conquered. And so I thought that they brought Christianity in at that time, you know, like under Haile Selassie or what have you. And so it just kind of crept its way into that. And so maybe that's what he's speaking of, about an ancient Christianity, or if there was actually a Christianity that was set forth in practice beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, you have the Gnostic systems that come out of Kemet, or which you may know as Egypt, you know, which predate the systems that we know today, is even, you know, even what we consider to be the Catholic systems, which of course are precursor to your Protestant systems. I'm going to say a couple of things about that. One, first thing I'm going to say is that you can ask Tariq. He does a call-in show, and I think he does a Ustream thing where you can chat or something like that. I think. I don't know if he still. I know he used to. I don't know if he still does. I've never listened to it, but I know he does something where you can type in and chat and ask a question. So that's an option there. But I'm going to answer the question to the best of my ability. But he's the one who said it, so I don't know what he was talking about. You know, in terms of because there's different ways to approach that. When we say that Christianity existed, or an ancient form of Christianity, I mean, yeah, I mean the Yoruba system is an ancient form of Christianity. It's all in how you look at it. You know, when you're dealing with like the Council of Nicaea, or the councils of Nicaea, because there were several ones. This is when, you know, the information was kind of created like a magazine into the form of what we know today to be like a Bible, and not to be a widespread Bible, because it's not like you had printing presses back then, you know, so it's not like everybody owned a Bible, you know, but just putting together the conglomerate, you know, and that collation of the different books, or at that time they would just call different testaments, you know, testimonies, you know, like you had letters, and different people would write different letters, and some of them made it into the book and some of them didn't. Some ideas made it into the book, some ideas didn't. But the thing is, a lot of the concepts and the ideas that were put into the book existed for a very long time in different systems. You know, you had the idea of a savior. You had the idea of a unseen father. You know, you had the idea of an equally strong antagonist. You had the idea of even 12 apostles or 12 disciples. You had the idea of the resurrection. You know, these things existed way before the Euro Christianity that many of us practice today, or have practiced today. So he may have been referring to that the actual end concept and idea, it did exist. It, you know, it may not have been, you know, the idea, even the word Christianity, you know, as we're told in the Bible, I mean, that came out of Antioch. With, you know, Christianity was like a derogatory term, but that's not actually true. You know, the idea of the Christ, or the Christ, that's an old word, you know, Christ or Christ. But the form and the defining and the reference of Christianity that we work with today is fairly new. You know, just in terms of what that form represents, the form of like, there's one God, and there's one pathway to that God, and you have to accept that one pathway with bended knee and so forth and so on, and your tongue must confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. All of that stuff is new. You know, many of the ideas are new. Taking out the fact that Mary, or Mary, where we also associated with Mary was also born of an immaculate birth. That was also removed. When you study it from the Gnostic perspective, you also find out that the original name of their Christ was not Christ. You know, it was a different name, you know, Amberthoth. So it's like, the ideas and the concepts of Christianity, yeah, they're very old. They existed on the continent before, but not in the exact same forms that we know it today. You know, so yeah, it's kind of
Right.
it's different ways to kind of look at, there's different ways to answer that one, and to look at it, because the same goes for Islam. The idea and the concept of what Islam is existed on the continent already. Now, for me to take something that already exists and pervert it a little bit and then slap a new name on it, it doesn't make it that original thing. It's like what El Hajj Malik Shabazz said, just if you put puppies in the oven doesn't mean you have biscuits. So once you take something, you can pervert it to the point that it's unrecognizable, or it loses its effectiveness of what it originally was. So I'm always careful when people say that, like, because sometimes people will use that as an excuse to practice something that no longer is relevant. They'll say, oh, well,
Yes.
we've been doing this. This is all African. They make everything African. Everything isn't African, and everyone isn't African. We do that thing too. Oh, you gotta love everybody, man, because we all come from the same place. We don't all come from the same place. It's just the problem. Like many of these traditions, you didn't witness when they were created. Just like many of the other quote unquote people walking on the planet, you weren't able there to witness when they were created. So you assume by the time you get to see them that they're the same thing that you are. Just like you assume that many of these world religions began in a innocuous way. They began in the same purity that the ones did that you feel that your ancestors practiced. And that's where kind of like the study of history comes in. Some of the stuff I wouldn't let my family anywhere near, just like some people can't get anywhere near my house. It's not all the same, and just because you may go to the root of something still doesn't even mean that you got something good. At its root, it might be rotten. So, it's really a study thing, but for what he was saying, like I said, I didn't see Hidden Colors. So, I don't really have the context. I don't really know, if he was referring to the concept of Christianity, or he might've just been referring to the Osirian myth. He might've just been referring to the story of Faru, Osir and Osset, because many people in the knowledge community, because Tariq doesn't consider himself to be part of the conscious community, but we'll just say conscious community, they use that as their reference of there being a previous Messiah, but there were other Messiahs, but I mean, many people will reference that one, Yeah. So that's about as close as I can come to some, to something with that. Not knowing the context.
Well, much appreciated.
Sure.
I appreciate how you broke it down and explained it, and it does make more sense to me now. I think that was just a quick passing passage that he just said and moved along with the film. But that just really kind of caught my attention, and I was like, oh, whoa, wait a minute, excuse me.
Right.
But then a lot of people, even today, use that excuse to say, well, that was an old ancient Christianity, and so I'm still going to be a Christian. I'm going to, read and continue to study the Bible and only the Bible, and use that as an excuse. Whereas we know that was written in the late 1500s, so there had to be an older or more ancient system than that.
Yeah, well, it's what you determine to be ancient.
Well, I appreciate it.
Sure, you're welcome, sis. Enjoy your evening. All right, thank you for the call. And what I was saying is that it's for those of you, she's on mute, but it's all about what you consider to be ancient. Just like it's what you consider to be traditional. For some young people today, the 90s is ancient. So the Bible is an ancient book. The Quran is an ancient book. But when does antiquity begin? And that's always the question. And at the same time, why are we always so dead set in digging through antiquity? Not to say that we shouldn't learn and we shouldn't research and find things out, but why is it that once something is ancient, it immediately receives the stamp of approval and embracement? When we really maybe should be turning and digging and developing what the ancients have become, because we're ancient. So what have the ancients become now should be the question, and I'm gonna quickly reference the baptismal piece because it actually is, and kind of in line with what the sister Imani was calling and speaking on. Like I said, you had old systems like the Gnostic system that existed in ancient Kemet, and even in your Gnostic systems, you had this idea of baptismal, and baptismal would bring you into a space where you now could be worked with. We'll say you now could be worked with by who they called Arabamento. In Arabamento, you guys would know as Yeshua, or others would know as Jesus. Or they say Jesus Christ, like Christ was his last name, but anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But, so anyway, that was like the savior, that we were taught about in the Gnostic systems, and, well, some of us, I mean, I studied it for a while, if you into Gnosticism, but, so the whole idea there of baptismal, like when we think about baptismal, a lot of times, just like the same dunking in the water that we get during a lot of our research rituals, we always got to go to Oshun because you need that woman to anoint you before you can go get anything done. You find that in all the traditions, the woman has to anoint you, because without that anointing, you don't have any magic. She's the magic. 3 entities that rule the world. Don't forget knowledge, money, and magic. Okay, that's why 3 is the sacred number of the 3rd planet from the sun. It's the 3 entities that rule this world. So you got to have that woman anoint you for you to be able to get anything done. Okay. So the idea there, again, of baptismal, a lot of times we look at it like, okay, I get baptized, I do this ritual, and I get a new life. And we don't understand that baptismal is not just about being pulled out of the water. I'm going to show you the more important part. The more important part of baptismal is being put into the water. This was the strain that ran through spiritual Baptists, through Shango Baptists, quote unquote, through Ife, through Orisha, through Shango, to this day, because you can be an adherent of these different traditions, but if you go to Trinidad and Tobago and if you haven't gone in the water, you ain't in it. You ain't in it. You can acknowledge it as being good and true and all that, but you don't go to that water, you ain't in it. Why? Because what is the water? The water is not just, I came up out of the water, looked down at my feet look new, looked at my hands, they look brand new too. I left the old man at all the most songs and stuff. The key is when you go into the water, you die. See, mourning is a big part of tradition. Not only indigenous tradition, but if you go to the islands and you deal with the spiritual Baptists, again, if you deal with Ife, you deal with Shango, especially in Shango, they do a lot of mourning, and they pick certain people at certain times of the year to do the mourning. The death is important because when you die, you remove the old crustated man out of you or woman out of you in order to make room for the deities to exist and work through you. So the old one has to die first, not just that you put it to the side because I got issues, but I'm getting initiated tomorrow. No, you don't do that. You can't have those issues. They got to go. They got to die for the new one to come in. We're getting ready to go in the archive, everyone, in like minute 90 and a half.
Seconds.
Or 90 seconds, according to Blog Talk. But, so it's that idea of mourning and dying that is the common thread that exists in all of those traditions. So what is dying? The traditions that you currently have are dying so that the new entities can take root inside of your spirit. That's what's dying. That's why I always tell you guys, well, when does the tradition begin?
60 seconds.
60 seconds. Tradition begins when the old man dies. That's why we say what? Know thyself, old man, because in knowing thyself, you shall know God. That was inscribed on the walls. Know thyself, old man. You're the only thing that's getting old. And that one has got to die for the eternal one to live within you. What are the eternal ones? Well, you see those every time you go to the bimbes when people get possessed. And what happens when they get possessed? They become those deities. But you got to go to the water first and have that removed from you, so you can go to the bimbes and the water and everything else and have those deities work through you. Now, that's the common
10
thread.
seconds.
The only difference is that if you're working with the spiritual Baptists, they're going to say, well, so you can welcome Yeshua into you, welcome Christ into you, and Christ can work through you. If you're dealing with Orisha or Shango, so that the Orisha can work through you. You see, but the common thing there is the water represents dying. Now, interesting, when you look at our Opon Ifa, when we're doing divination in the West, you have water, and water is what? Death, signified by our Egun. So your baptismals and your spiritual rituals, and now for some of you who have been dunked in the water, because I can't speak about initiations and consecrations and stuff like that, but a lot of rituals, as you guys know, like spiritual baths, will tell you get all the way under the water, get it over your head, don't just sprinkle it around your lower body and your stomach, because you got to die. So when we pull you out, we lift you out, or you step out, that's the new child coming forth. But mourning is a key piece here. And the acknowledgement of not just, I feel great, I feel new, man, look at me, wow, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But the acknowledgement of the mourning is more important. Because as you're acknowledging the mourning, you're creating and manifesting a situation where those old issues are no longer present. Because you can't mourn something and at the same time have it be actively manifested and present in your world. You can't have it both ways. So that's why that mourning is a key piece to all of this. And it's a thread that runs through them all. That has been Foundational Friday. I want to thank you all for listening. It has been a blast. All right. And I will be here this Sunday on Chief Speaks, 11 a.m. Eastern. Make sure you call in bright and early so we can build. And so the thing I was going to say about Chief Speaks, 347-945-7680 is the number for now. And then it's going to change. But for now, just remember Enlightenment and Transformation TV on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe so you know when the videos are coming out, because we're switching things up now. Comment, share. Like I said, I do read your comments. I'm reading them as the show's going on. And not only that, but you can also jump in on the Hangout. We have some instructionals we've been working on for people who don't know how that whole process works. But that's kind of cool because it's more interactive than just a phone call. All right. It's been good, everyone. Thank you for spending this time with me, and have a happy Halloween. I know some of you got candy, you're handing it out. Don't try to act all super conscious. I know my listeners. I know you guys. All right. Until next time. Hotepu.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.